In this video, I'll be making my updated 2025 gubernatorial election prediction, as we are just around 4 weeks away from the general election. Now, there has been a lot of developments in both of these states, and I'll get through them. I will say that the state of New Jersey has not started early voting, but in Virginia, there has already been early voting, where over 400,000 ballots have already been cast in the state of Virginia. So, of course, we'll have an early look of both of these states. Now, both these states were decided by pretty razor-thin margins in the 2021 gubernatorial elections. When Joe Biden was president, there was California, the recall vote, but Virginia was decided by 1.9% in favor of Glenn Youngkin, while Phil Murphy won New Jersey by about 3.2%. There has been developments in both these states. I will start off here in the state of Virginia. Virginia, we know that incumbent Lieutenant Governor Winsome Earl Sears is going to be the Republican nominee, as Glenn Youngkin is term limited. He did defeat Terry McAuliffe, the former governor who served between 2013 and 2017 in the state of Virginia. Now, 2021 was one of those elections where the Democratic Party had a really unpopular incumbent Democrat, being Joe Biden, and that was in part why the Democrats lost. Glenn Youngkin was also a very strong candidate. However, in Virginia, there is a history of the state really voting against the incumbent president's party, and that would generally suggest that Abigail Spanberger is the favored. If you look at the recent polling here, as well as the predictions, it does seem like that this is a race that will go to the Democratic Party, probably by a likely margin. You look at polling here, Winsome Sears has not led in a single poll, and the polling aggregates consistently suggest about a 7 to 8% advantage for Abigail Spanberger. However, there have been some revelations that might actually help the Republican Party. This is the one big scandal that has plagued Democrats in the state of Virginia. That is in the Attorney General's race, which will also be in the ballot on November. Now, if you look at some of the news here, it shows that this Democrat, Jay Jones, the Democratic nominee for Attorney General in the state of Virginia, who only won his primary by 2% against another Democrat, he actually suggested that the Republican speaker deserved to be, you can see the word, mentioning him alongside names like Hitler. Now, obviously, he would probably lose in this race. The incumbent Attorney General Jason Myers has already attacked Jay Jones for that comment. It remains to be seen as to what the down ballot effect is to that comment, but I don't think it's going to really shape up the gubernatorial election that much. Jay Jones has refused to step down as a Democratic nominee, especially considering that early voting has already been underway. And a lot of the parties, a lot of individuals who have endorsed Abigail Spanberger are calling on Jay Jones to drop out. That being said, I don't think it's going to have a significant down ballot impact, but we'll have to see more polls before we know that for sure. Right now, though, Abigail Spanberger certainly looks like the favored. Spanberger and Winsome Sears were not contesting a primary. However, if you look at the fundraising numbers, Spanberger has 11 million cash on hand and has raised over 16 million. On the Republican side, though, the numbers are not as impressive. Sears raised about 5.6, and she has 4 million cash on hand. It also seems as though the state of Virginia is a bit too liberal for it to go to the Republican Party. The trend in Virginia has generally been that Democrats have been doing, relatively speaking, better and better every election. In Virginia, even though the state shifted 4.3 to the Republicans, when you factor in the popular vote, the state actually trended more towards the Democratic Party. Therefore, it's going to be a hard race, in my opinion, for the Republicans to flip in a year when the Republican incumbent is the president. Trump's approval rating is not that bad, especially for Trump. It's actually a pretty good approval rating, but I don't think it's going to get the job done as of right now. Unless, of course, this scandal really shapes how voters view Abigail Spanberger, but I really doubt that that will end up being the case. Now we look at Virginia. I would say right now it would probably be about a 5% win for Abigail Spanberger. Now we go to the state of New Jersey. New Jersey is by far the more interesting race, in my opinion, in this election cycle. New Jersey's incumbent Governor Phil Murphy, who was expected to win by a huge margin, predicted likely and safe for Democratic. Polls suggested that he was going to win by upper single digits, about 7, 8, or 9%. He only won by 3. He thought he was going to win by 15, by the way. You know, Democrats were not considered at all. This race was not watched until election night when Jack Chiarelli took the lead when about a third of the vote was in. He held the lead until about 80% was counted, and Phil Murphy took the lead in the last 20%. Now, in this race here, there's been a few clashes by these two candidates, one of them being Trump. Jack Chiarelli, in the debate that was done just last night, gave Trump an A, and Mikey Sherrill gave Trump an F. So that's one of the really big differences here. If this becomes a national race, it's going to be harder for Chiarelli to actually win because, of course, the Republicans are not that popular in New Jersey. That being said, Trump only lost the state by 6, which would make this race far more interesting. After all, the state was going to go for Harris by 15, or so everyone thought, and this race ended up with this being decided by less than 6%. Now, polling right now does suggest that Mikey Sherrill is favored, which makes sense. The predictors also suggest that Sherrill is up by about a lead margin. That being said, those numbers look even worse than the numbers for the Democratic Party back in 2021, where Democrats won the race by 3. The polling aggregate shows that Sherrill's up by 3, by 5, by 5, by 4, which is kind of the average. Considering that Murphy was up by about 10% in the polling average, this is definitely concerning for Mikey Sherrill. Not to mention that the Democratic Party is not that unified behind her, and in the primary race on the Democratic side, Sherrill only got about 34% of the vote, so barely over a third. Now, of course, there's going to be a lot of factors deciding this race, and we'll still have to see. The early voting numbers could tell us a lot. I think it's going to be a close race in my opinion. I would right now say that Sherrill is narrowly favored by a small margin, but do not count out Jack Chiarelli. That is because we saw that back in 2021, where pretty much Chiarelli absolutely gave up. If you just look at the numbers here, the fundraising suggested that, Chiarelli was doing quite decently actually, but he pretty much gave up. A lot of Republican candidates gave up in the state of New Jersey, and the race was actually quite competitive. Now that New Jersey is much more of a swing state on the presidential level, as in only being about lean to likely Democrat as opposed to safe, this race could very easily go to the Republican Party. So overall, I would say that Virginia right now about a 5 to 5.5% victory for Abigail Spanberger, give or take about 2%. While in New Jersey right now, I would say that probably Sherrill is favored by about 1%, probably 60-40 in favor of Sherrill percentage-wise as of right now. I would say also give a take or about 2%. So Jack Chiarelli certainly has a chance there. Thank you so much for watching. Have a nice day. Goodbye.